I'd like to take a moment to say a huge thank you to our sponsors for the How to Thrive podcast, Flank. Flank is your in-house legal team's first AI colleague. Flank introduces AI native agents who are designed to integrate seamlessly into your existing systems, empowering legal teams like yours to work smarter. They instantly resolve commercial team requests, eliminate bottlenecks, and enable your legal team to operate at the speed the business needs. But this is just the beginning. At Flank, they firmly believe that the future isn't simply about better software. It's about building towards a future where fully autonomous AI colleagues will own entire workflows end to end, deeply embedded into your tools and systems. This is the new generation agentic engine that's redefining what's possible for in-house legal. If you'd like to find out more about Flank, have a look at getflank.ai. And if you get in touch with them, please do mention How to Thrive, so that they know that it came from one of our wonderful listeners.
In 2017, I ignored the warning signs and paid the price. And I went into my head and almost never came out.
Hello, Helen. How are you?
Hello, I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. We were just talking before this, weren't we, about the time change. I'm a little bit tired. How can I be a little bit tired when it's only an hour?
I know.
You know, but this morning, my clock went off at the equivalent of 5:30. I mean, it was 6:30 in new time, but 5:30 in old time. And now I'm exhausted. I feel like I got up at 5:30, but I didn't get up at 5:30 because I went to bed at the equivalent of 10. It boggles my mind every time there's a time change how much it messes me up. And I get hungry at different times. It's funny, isn't it? It's funny how no matter that I've been doing the time change for 43 years and yet still it kind of just throws me. But anyway, that's me. Totally irrelevant for anybody who's listening to this in, say, I don't know, July. But There we go.
Yeah,
At least we remembered the time change. So
I didn't.
That's a positive.
I didn't. I just woke up and thought, oh, that's peculiar. I slept till 8 o'clock. Gosh, I must have been really tired. And then I went downstairs and, like, in my still slightly sleep dazed, like, just go and put the kettle on sort of addled mind, I looked at the clock and went, oh, well, that clock says 7 o'clock. And then I had that moment of, oh, I see what's happened here.
Do you find you've got to have one clock in the house, right, which is still battery powered and not connected to the Wi-Fi, just so you can be absolutely sure that the time has changed? I have this in my head. So most of our clocks in our house are in some way attached to the Wi-Fi. So the cooker clocks, the clocks obviously on our phones. Chris has got like something attached to the Bluetooth next to him, like all of this. And then there's one clock in the kitchen, which is old school. And that's how I know
that's the truth. That's the truth clock.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
That is the truth clock. So that in the car, because obviously we don't change the car clock until we just let it go for 6 months until it goes back to the right time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
apart from the exhaustment, that's not a word, exhaustment of the times changing, what else have you been up to? Dearest.
Dearest.
That's very patronising, wasn't it?
Yes, thank
Sorry.
you. I've what have I been up to? Went to BSAVA last week. Realised it was my 13th BSAVA, and like that.
Ooh, unlucky. Ooh.
No, it was the best one yet. I think the content was spot on.
BSAVA, for those that don't know what you're talking about, is the British
Small Animal.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
British Small Animal Veterinary Association conference, in Manchester, and it was just really nice to connect with some people and hang out, and just it was a really good feeling. I spoke about civility and about human factors and patient safety, and attended some fab other lectures. Like I say, had an opportunity to chat to great people, and just came home with my cup full of just love for everything. So that was good. Obviously I was tired, but 4 days
recurring theme.
4 days of hardcore conferencing is
do you know, I went into London twice last week, okay, and left on, so one was on Tuesday, and that was just the morning. I was home by like 2:30, and then on Thursday I went in for a long day. We can talk about Thursday, but I was in all day and then had a dinner thing in the evening. Oh my word, Friday, couldn't string a sentence together, and I was like, how did I used to do this every day? I can't. Is it the stimulus of people? Is it the conversation? I don't know. I couldn't function. I was so tired. Yeah, I
Is
think we
it-
need to maybe build up our fitness.
Our resilience surrounding, stamina of work.
It did remind me though, because so on Thursday we launched our new cohort of the Thriving Teams program, which was amazing. 12 new delegates have joined us for 9 months of immersive learning. But I think one of the things we actually talked about, and it did really resonate on Friday. I think we were talking about kind of like keeping our cups full, if you like, so they didn't brim over, weren't we? And I have to say that on Friday, I felt like that. I was like, I need to go and sit down in a dark room now, because I feel like I need to reinvest in myself. But yeah, even though it brings me huge amounts of joy, and it was such an amazing group, just the energy and the engagement was, second to none. But yeah, still beyond all of that, I still was like, I can't string a sentence together.
But I suppose in some respects that's normal, right? If you've had a busy day where you've worked and like done a lot of thinking, connected with people, enjoyed it, had interesting conversations, your brain has worked really hard, hasn't it? And I sort of think, that's probably quite a natural thing. And then listening to your body and saying, actually, I am tired today. This is okay. This is as it should be. If I wasn't tired, it would be a little bit weird. I'd be, a bit of a robot, perhaps.
That's true. I think as well, I sometimes I find I forget that being brain tired, or I guess where's that cognitive tiredness, when your brain's tired, that actually almost that's a type of physical tiredness as well. Because when we left, we said goodbye on Thursday. I was like, anyway, I'm just going for dinner in Soho, so I'm going to walk. And I was in Bank, and that took an hour. And then after dinner, I was like, well, I could walk to Great Portland Street and get the tube, but hey, at Great Portland Street, I might as well walk all the way. So I ended up essentially walking from Bank to Marylebone to get some fresh air. I mean, like I was already exhausted from a brain perspective or a mental perspective, and now I was physically done too. But yeah. So that was fun, but another great cohort underway. So super exciting to see them go. And then you're off to Glasgow tomorrow, are you? Sunny Glasgow.
I am off to sunny Glasgow. Yeah, a little hop, skip and a jump in the airplane to go, and it's a reaccreditation day at the university for one of the master's courses that I tutor on. And then the next day I'm going to spend with some of the staff at the Small Animal Hospital talking about resilience, actually, talking about leadership and resilience and hoping to change some people's minds about the word resilience, as obviously we all know that has kind of very become a sort of a bit of a negative thing in the veterinary industry. So we're rewiring that hopefully as well, and giving people lots of great tips on how they can improve their well-being.
Why does the veterinary profession regard it as a negative?
I think it's because it's really associated with kind of digging deeper and working harder and getting on with it, and that kind of resilience, rather than having the tools in your back pocket so you can be dynamic and flex to situations and bounce forward. It's kind of seen more as people saying you must be resilient, as in you must just dig deeper when it's hard. Stop whinging, stay later, work harder, those kind of things. And I think that is become quite negative. So, but it's interesting, perhaps I might have had that viewpoint at some point, but I think what I understand now is that it's just a broad terminology for your own well-being and understanding how you can do the things that actually fill up your cup, bring you joy, manage your stress, understanding how you respond to challenge and threat, all of those kind of things, actually working with our brains and our bodies, rather than kind of putting up this barrier of, I'm not going to be resilient. Because I think sometimes what I've heard is that people feel that they're being asked to be resilient and dig deeper, but actually organisations are not supporting them in that, to do that. So I think it's a team sport, isn't it? It's about helping each other and, working with each other to create sustainable practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So should we talk about today's guest?
Yes, let's.
Today's guest, Dan Stanley, a brilliant guy who I first met, and I think we talk about this in the podcast episode itself. When we were launching Thrive Legal, the community, I put a post on LinkedIn because so much of what we do is predominantly female attended. And I put a post out saying, where are all the men? And that prompted me to kind of do some work and chat to Dan about, actually, is there a difference between what men need and are looking for from a community and what women are probably looking for, and how could we do more to meet the needs of men? And that sparked a phenomenal conversation with Dan, who has had a really rich background and is incredibly self-aware, but also very happy to be vulnerable, which is incredibly refreshing, really. So it was a brilliant conversation. He's a great guy. He runs a group called Men and Mountains. So they go on walking adventures, which sounds phenomenal. And also it's a better man is his website, but also his community. So yeah, take a listen. Really informative. I loved every minute of talking to Dan, and I think he's doing some fabulous work.
Definitely.
So take a listen and join us at the other end, where Helen and I will be chewing the cud over what we've heard and listened to. So yeah, enjoy it, everybody.
Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of How to Thrive. I'm joined, as always, by the lovely Helen. How are you, Helen?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. And today I'm very excited because we've got Dan Stanley, who is the founder of Better Men. And he is on a mission to challenge the myth of masculinity, which we will dig into, I am sure. But first, Dan, welcome. Welcome to How to Thrive.
Thank you, Claire. Hi, Helen.
Hello. I am so excited to have you here today because I think we have been talking about recording this podcast for months. And I was reflecting on how we originally got in touch, because actually it wasn't through our mutual connections, which we've since discovered. But I think it was because we were hosting a launch event for our Thrive community. And I put a post out on LinkedIn, which was essentially, where are all the men? Because we have a huge amount of females in our community. We're a really engaged audience there, but the men we find harder to engage. So I think I then went on a mission to try and find someone who might be able to support me and point me in the direction of what we needed to do, if anything, to attract men, which sounds a bit dodge, but it's not meant to. So enter Dan Stanley. So Dan, we start all of our podcasts asking all our guests the same question, which is essentially, what's your story? What brought you here? What brought you to Better Men? What brought you to your quest?
In 2017, I ignored the warning signs and paid the price. My life was littered with external successes: retired, award-winning army commando, national sporting champion, married to a beautiful woman, first-time father, lived in a detached house, drove a German car. But there was a realization, I know, smiling and laughing already, that when reality came home, my realization was that my success was superficial and I hid it behind fake smiles. And kind of felt trapped in a life that I'd worked hard to build. And I went into my head and almost never came out. Yeah, kind of on reflection, looking back, I recognized that not only was it a period of adversity, but my experience, it nearly cost me my sanity, my marriage, and nearly my life. So kind of here now, a number of years on, I feel really empowered to advocate not just for the men of today, but for maturing the version of masculinity that we've come to experience.
So, I mean, when we spoke, I remember thinking this about you, and I remember thinking, wow, I mean, to have that self-awareness, to stop and think something's not right here, it sounds amazing. I think we spoke at the time that for me to kind of realize my inner self, I'd had to go through, months of transformational coaching. Was there a trigger moment for you where you kind of just had this epiphany, or was it more gradual than that? I mean, what was the moment where you just thought, you know what, on paper I've got everything, but actually it's just not doing it for me?
Yeah. Poor mental health was absolutely not on my radar. I was naive enough to think that as a retired leader of men in the military and somebody that had pretty much captained every sports team he'd been part of, that I was robust and resilient. And then life invited me to realize otherwise. I kind of didn't associate the symptoms at the time with poor mental health, but racing mind, sense of anxiety, sleepless nights, a withdrawal from my loved ones. yeah, it was really difficult for me to understand at the time what I was experiencing. And as I said, I went into my head, tried to solve it with critical thinking and logic, and actually couldn't. So cutting a long story short, my wife and I separated for a period of time. And whilst that was exceptionally difficult for both of us, we decided that we tried to rebuild our marriage. And that was probably a moment of inflection for me, where I realized that not only did I need to change, but we needed to change how we applied ourselves to our marriage. And again, coming back to this idea of naivety, this was in my mid-30s, and despite what would look like a lot of life experience, it had all been very linear and very traditional. There wasn't a lot of emotional engagement in my life experiences. So my wife and I decided that we'd go on a kind of a make or break holiday to the Maldives, kind of go out to the Indian Ocean to kind of repair the ruptures in our marriage, and leave all of that, leave all our marital baggage in the Maldives and come back and live happily ever after. And it definitely didn't happen that way. But there was a moment of insight for me that at the time changed my trajectory. And I was reading a book on the beach called Legacy. It's about the culture and the psychology of the All Blacks, and what at the time made them one of the most successful sporting teams in the world. And a few sunbeds down on this bespoke atoll, really the beautiful Indian Ocean, there was a guy of a similar age to me, and he was reading The Chin Paradox. And he managed to catch my eye, and very quickly, he said, "We must be the only two blokes in the Maldives reading self-help books." He's like, "What's your story?" And I tried to bat him off with some humor and kind of just get away from this guy, because I was in a sense of probably fight or flight, really. I really wasn't ready to share my story, because I couldn't understand it myself at this stage. But nevertheless, we grabbed a beer and was sat on the white sand looking out across the blue ocean. And I didn't recognize this guy, but it turned out he was an ex-Premiership footballer back in the noughties. He'd played for one of the big London clubs. And despite living in a penthouse and driving sports cars and kind of living this lifestyle that you'd expect with somebody in Premiership football, he'd had 2 knee operations that hadn't worked. And he'd spiraled into gambling, into drug addiction and prostitution. And he's speaking with a level of vulnerability. Firstly, that's my first impression. This guy, wow, this guy's vulnerable. But then I realized he was also courageous. And growing up in the Northwest, in a rugby and a military culture, I didn't realize that a man could speak with such compassion without making himself weak or emasculating himself. And then he turned to me, Claire Helen, and he said, "The only difference between a grave and a rut is the depth. The only difference in life between a grave and a rut is the depth." And even now, hairs on her neck, they're standing to attention. I walked back across the beach to my wife, Rachel. She was like reading OK Magazine or something at the time. And I was like, "Yeah, look, when we get home, I'm going to press pause on my life. I need to take some time out." And she gave me what I needed in that moment, and it was space. I didn't have the answers, but I just knew that I needed the space. And on the connecting flight from Dubai back to Heathrow, I wrote an exit plan, shut my business down, stepped away from my commercial interests, and took 8 months out.
I mean, wow. I mean, I'm kind of a bit speechless, because you're absolutely right. That's hair raising stuff. And I think, yeah. I mean, so 8 months out, and what do you do in 8 months to find who Dan actually is, and not kind of, I guess, the social construct, which is probably what a lot of us are and a lot of us have become?
Since I'd started to understand my story, I've been having more conversations with people that I perceive to be succeeding in life, fellow peers, business owners, friends, and was coming to the conclusion that actually lots of men that look like they're successful on paper or have worked hard to build lives simply are feeling very similar to as I was, lacking purpose, a distinct lack of fulfillment, feel like they're neglecting their health, their marriages, their parental responsibilities, or the privilege of being a parent, and that I was going to do something about it. So Rachel said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to start a business. It's going to be called Better Men, and it's going to be a little bit like Ron Seal in that it does exactly what it says on the tin."
So we're talking about like redefining masculinity. So maybe let's kind of take it back and kind of think about, how have we got in this, how have we got here, basically?
Yeah. It goes back at least 200 years to the Industrial Revolution.
Perfect. We've got time.
Oh, when we look at the formation of those once rigid gender roles, it goes all the way back to the Industrial Revolution. Men went out to work to earn the bread. And then when we fast forward to kind of the next, perhaps most significant milestone, we're looking at the World Wars. And these young boys come back as damaged men. Next, we kind of got the baby boomers, whose fathers were perhaps in many respects emotionally numb. And their message from the nation is very much about rebuilding the country through its economy. So work, work, work. And yet that inflects with the same time that marketing becomes this kind of global phenomenon where, we can always spend our money on the things that were once luxuries become necessities. And we have this concept of keeping up with the Joneses. And then you, I, and your good self, Helen, we're a product of those generations, and that almost linear pathway into where we find ourselves today. Lots of our grandparents were perhaps emotionally repressed. That stiff upper lip kind of just gets on with mentality, so they're not connected to their emotions. Our parents were very much work orientated, and there might be nothing to see, but there's everything to feel. And we're a product of that parenting, that conditioning. And ultimately, when you ask that question, Claire, where are all the men? Most of them are either in one of three states: asleep, aware, or awake. But because most people have bought into this kind of intergenerational messaging that professional success equals personal happiness, they follow this linear pathway through education into the world of work, which means that, they overwork and underlive. And eventually, at some point in their lives, there'll be a moment of usually slow awakening where the recognition is that life is returning less than they expected. And that's a confusing time for men, particularly when they've followed this kind of messaging that they've been subjected to for the entirety of their lives.
One of the things that I almost struggle with, and even trying to phrase this kind of thought, I worry about how I might be perceived by women. So that comes with a massive caveat, because I'm a huge supporter of women and the progression of women and all of that. But one thing I do worry about is that the men are forgotten. And I think that's where my actual, when I originally said where all the men came from, my husband is, we fall worryingly into exactly your description. We have the house, we drive the German car, my husband is an accountant, all this kind of thing. And I remember saying to him, where do you hang out? Like, what support groups do you have? And I mean, partly that probably sounds like a really ignorant question because he's my husband and maybe I should know that. But from a professional perspective, there are hundreds of them for women. I could probably go to a different women's in event every night of the week if I wanted. I'm still a member, even though I don't practice law anymore, of 2 active women in law WhatsApp groups. There is a really strong female community out there. And I suppose I'm really curious as to where are the men? Do they also have their own communities? And if they don't have those communities, then, wrong question. Do they have those communities, and do they have them in a different way? Is maybe the WhatsApp group isn't what they want? What do they need instead? So I'd be curious to kind of, understand your perspective on that.
Those groups do exist and they're becoming more commonplace. But the biggest barrier to men reaching out, again, is that conditioning. If you look at the messaging of that young boys would have received, back in the late 70s, early 80s, about what it meant to be a man: strong, silent, self-sufficient, successful. They're the barriers that are sitting either mentally or emotionally within a man that stops him actually engaging in peer-to-peer networks. And it's tough. It's really tough. And it's hard to say that because the media message around men and masculinity nowadays isn't particularly positive. So when a man does struggle or starts to come to some kind of awareness that actually he might be climbing a ladder against the wrong wall, then there's, okay, like, what do I do with this? They sit in that discomfort for a period of time. They might read a few books or listen to a few podcasts, but will they step over the line and engage in a peer-to-peer network? My experience is often they won't until there's some kind of adversity. And it's an Einstein quote. He said that adversity introduces a man to himself. And that's an opportunity to either double down and try harder, but potentially be heading in the wrong direction, or to lift one's head out of the proverbial sand and to step into one of these spaces, such as Men and Mountains, the walking group that I lead and facilitate.
I was going to ask you about that actually, because for a start, I think I said to you, can we have one for women too? I think that's for me to start. But anyway, and I'm really fascinated by this because, from what you were saying before about men and being, strong and silent and successful, I can almost see that if you think about those are maybe whether they're conditioned traits, but deeply conditioned traits, if you want to have that peer-to-peer networking, then layering that with something like climbing a mountain seems absolutely perfect, because of course that does, you're leaning into those natural habits perhaps, which are, strong, silent as you walk up, hills, because there inevitably is, success because you reach the top. It just feels like actually you're working with that rather than against it.
It's purely a modality for honest conversation. At the start of every walk, there'll be a point of discussion or a question that I'll present to the guys that meet. And for context, there's been over 600 people registered for Men and Mountains over the last few years. And usually on a walk, we'll have somewhere around 20 to 30 men, but we have had upwards of 50. And when there's that silence and people are slightly curious, perhaps slightly concerned about what this month's question or point of discussion is going to be, there's a heaviness in the air. But once somebody breaks the ice, usually myself or one of what I call the old guard, the guys that turn up month in, month out, breaks the ice, it's incredible how quick men converse about their honest experiences. As an example of questions for those that are listening, it could be as simple as, where in your life do you know you need to do better? In January, the question posed to those gathered was, what advice would your future self give this version of you now? And once that silence has been broken, for the next 4 hours, people are walking alongside each other, climbing a mountain, dealing with the adversity of the weather or the route selection that I've chosen, not lost in their own heads, but lost in conversation with other good quality men. And one of our members, Lawrence, he described the group as men with strong backs and open hearts. And believe me, there's nothing new age or hippie about us. But that's exactly who we are. Good men with strong backs and open hearts.
I love that. And when can people find out about Man and Mountains and tell me more? Is it open to everybody? How often do you do it? Tell us more.
Okay, we meet monthly. There's no cost, no commitment. But there's a couple of criteria that are important for the safety of everybody. The first being fitness. People we need to probably be able to run 10K in 70 minutes, which isn't a particularly significant task.
It's me out.
Yeah, exactly. But the reality is, between our sofas, our desks, and our beds, very few men actually keep themselves in a state of physical readiness. But aside from fitness, which I think is a very low bar to entry, having a waterproof jacket, a set of boots with ankle protection are really important. But outside of those, the most important criteria is to be able to leave one's ego back in the car park and to engage in honest dialogue.
And I think it's awesome that there is this space out there. I suppose it kind of leads me on to the question of, and I suppose it's very generalist, but do you think that we are trying to provide almost the wrong spaces for men? Like in terms of, men aren't going to fit into these spaces where or men, that's not probably, maybe the masculine energy isn't naturally going to fit into these spaces where we have WhatsApp groups and we meet and we have coffee and, or, we have like monthly drinks, or we have maybe even an inspirational speaker that isn't going to trigger them to share in the way that maybe the female energy would be drawn to do. I don't know. Do you think that's too much of a generalization?
No, I think it's actually very, very important part of our conversation. Conference rooms, hotels, cool meeting spaces. What are men going to do when they come into that environment? Unless there's a skilled facilitator that can hold the space and to kind of invite people to feel safe being expressive. I mean, resistance use the word vulnerability. You mentioned about masculine energy. I know Mark Zuckerberg has been in the press recently, and there's been a lot of pushback against him inviting masculine energy back into the boardrooms. But what is masculine energy? Most people don't really know what it is. They just know that the patriarchy hasn't worked for men or women. Richard Reeves, who is a real thought leader in the space, he said that we can do more for boys and men without doing less for women and girls. And I think that's absolutely true. So this masculine energy that we're talking about here, for me, it's about activation energy. It's about taking action. So whether it's cold water dipping, climbing mountains, men's sheds, if you provide a space that's conducive to men doing something with a level of physicality, activation, and energy, conversations will develop fairly organically.
In the village I live in the street that I live in, we have a book club, and my husband's very sociable, and we set up this book club that was for women. I think only women were allowed. It was a little sexist, but hey, that's another story. So we set up this book club, and my husband said, "Oh, well, let's get the men together when the women are having their book club once a month in the evening. Let's get the men together and do something." And he's really struggled to get any traction with that, to get anybody to even just go to the pub for a drink or a chat or anything like that. It's really interesting. But the women, we're so bonded, and so it's so important for us that we make it every month and we read the book and we do all the stuff and we have the chat. But that buy-in from the men is like, and now I'm thinking, actually, is a dark winter's evening where you go to the pub, is that the selling point, or does it need to be something more active where they go and do something? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the issue here is that so many of us live time-poor lives that if you were to go and join a book club, what would you put down to be able to create the space for that? So it might be more of a challenge of practicality. In rethinking masculinity, very early on, I talk about what I refer to as the top 5 challenges of modern day men. And the first is this kind of workaholism, which is respectable addiction, in my opinion and my experience. Well, as a product of living in time poverty, we end up lonely. It was a Joe Cox commission, I think it was 2018, it was published, found that 33% of men don't have a best friend. It's really sad. And I was out running one morning, and the podcast host said, "In your moment of need, who would you call?" And I had the realization it wouldn't be who I'd refer as my best friends. If you have to think about that for more than a few seconds, I would suggest that there's an element of loneliness, whether you're willing or prepared to accept it. So if we're time poor and we're lonely and we experience the challenges of life, which inevitably will happen, whether it's grief or identity crisis or workplace stress or marital conflict, whatever it is, if we don't have a space to sound this out or to be held and supported or even heard by our peers, the likelihood is that you're on the pathway towards some kind of poor mental health experience. Then we arrive at midlife. Wow, what a time period that is for all of us. And the way I kind of look at mid-health is it's inevitable. Midlife is it's inevitable. For women, it might be brought on by the biology and the menopause, but for men, usually there's it feels quite slow, and then there's a sudden awareness that actually they might have been spending their finite time pursuing the wrong rewards. And there's this concept of the 2 mountains. I want to say by the author David Brooks. He talks about the first mountain of a man's life is about status, success, significance, proving his worth to the world. And the second mountain is about contentment, fulfillment, purpose, contribution. And because of the conditioning that young boys and adolescent men experience, it's unfortunate, but many men get stuck doing repetitions of the first mountain and they don't realize it until it's too late. So if you lost yourself in work, you haven't spoken about your challenges, you've had some kind of midlife experience, it might be that you end up in a place of marital conflict like I and Rachel did. And divorce now is an inevitability. 42% last time I checked of marriages and ending divorce, the average age being 46 to 49. Once you get past the practicalities of paying the bills and raising the children, smartphones, kind of streaming services. Actually, so many couples go to bed each night, maybe inches apart, but they're miles apart in their levels of connection. And there's a high degree of frustration for me. And it's part of the work that I do with my clients is about recognizing what they need to reinvest in. And in almost all cases, my clients will suggest that it's the marital relations. I think it's like this linear path.
And you obviously had quite a radical shift, in terms of your awakening, if we like, and then kind of your shift. And it reminds me of when I very first started working with my kind of transformational coach. Almost, I can't remember when it was. It probably wasn't the first session. It was quite early on. She basically said to me, we've got two choices, Claire. We can either rip it up the rule book and start again, or we can support you to live within the framework that you already have. And for me personally, it was mainly around kind of work and the career. And me being me was like, I want to rip up the rule book, and I have. And so, it's a similar journey in some respects to yours, in that, I moved from corporate life, set up my own business, we do Being Human, all of this. But I suppose there's a few people who'd be like, do I have to do that? Do I have to rip it all up? Are there steps I can do within my existing framework? So, I can still be the successful businessman, but, are there steps you can take within that are more easy to digest?
Yeah, absolutely. Without overly simplifying or doing these concepts a disservice, for me, I call them the 4 big ideas. The first is sleep. It's proven that our quality of sleep determines how long we live, and yet we take it for granted. And so in terms of really small steps, prioritizing our sleep, there's so many different concepts and ideas out there nowadays, but just setting a time to put down the phones or turn off the television, to converse with partners if you have them, or to read a book that will be beneficial to your future. So prioritizing a bedtime, I think, is really important in terms of sleep. I'd suggest that food, such a well-known statement now that we are what we eat. But you need to ask yourself sometimes, what is it that you're putting into your body? If it's high levels of caffeine or processed food, and there's no excuse nowadays for not understanding what you're putting into your body. But what it does take is an element of interest. So we've got sleep and we've got food. Movement. I've got time to go to the gym. Okay, that's great. Okay, but if you could get off the tube, a stop earlier, or you could give yourself 20 minutes at lunch and just go move, and this is part of that value of Men and Mountains, to coin I call it a dose. You get a dose of wellness, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And all you need to do is move your body, and all those neurotransmitters will make you feel better about who you are. And then the last of these 4 big ideas is connection. I'm not talking about social media connection. I'm talking about picking up the phone and calling somebody, really checking in with somebody. Yeah. So it's going to be as simple as that. Sleep, food, movement, and connection.
We ask all of our guests to for their 3 top tips for thriving. I feel like we've probably just had 4 top tips for thriving. I'm not sure. Have you got more? In which case, I'm going to carry on writing them down. What would your 3 top tips for thriving be, Dan?
Self-leadership is probably the most prominent pillar. Once we get past the discomfort of being honest with ourselves, what largely comes down to then enabling my clients to progress their own lives is this idea of self-leadership. And for me, self-leadership starts with awareness of self. So in terms of 3 principles, self-awareness, I think is the first most significant point. I believe that awareness is the gateway or the prerequisite of any meaningful change. So you need to become aware of where you're at, and importantly, where you're heading, because you might not want to arrive there. So you need to check yourself. After awareness, I think it's regulation, self-regulation. So many of us now will have coping strategies for the complexities of our own lives. And they might not be as obvious as alcohol or porn or social media. They could be more nuanced, but we need to be able to regulate ourselves so that we feel able to take life's challenges on. And the last part for me is about setting intentions. If you don't set intentions, then the likelihood is that you'll be asleep at the controls and just drift through life kind of on autopilot. So, self-awareness, regulating yourself so you can stay above the chaos and complexity of life, and then setting intentions so you have a trajectory to progress your life from.
Powerful stuff. Love that. Absolutely love it. I have so many questions, so we might have to do a follow-up. We might have a part 2. But honestly, Dan, it's been really enlightening and 100% worth every minute of the wait to speak to you. I hope that everybody gets as much value from this as I've got, and I feel like I've got some action points to take forward myself. So thank you so much, Helen.
Yeah, just to echo those sentiments of thank you so much, Dan. I've kind of in my head been making a list of men that I'm going to be sending your details to, because I just sort of think so many people I know need to hear this. I think everybody needs to hear it, or at least know that it's there. Do you know what I mean? So that if you're ready to make that kind of move, then you know that there's somebody who can help you and support you.
It's the connection point, isn't it, as well, I think. I think knowing that, I think there's so much spoken about in the female space, there's so much spoken. We all are so vocal about it, and that's taken a long time, but we all are. Whereas in men, I feel like maybe there's not quite yet that connected feeling that actually there are more of us who are in it. We're all in it together. This isn't just me. It's a lot of us. I think that's it.
I think just quickly, that's a really important thread to pick up on, that like our ego will have us believe that we're the only ones kind of going through these experiences, and actually, because of this kind of social construct of masculinity, for all the reasons that we've spoken about today, we're never alone in our experience. And it starts with permission, giving ourselves permission to really hold the mirror up to the lives that we're living, and to question whether we're heading in the right direction.
Helen, Dan, what a conversation.
Oh my goodness. I can't really explain how I feel. I had this incredible warmth while speaking to him, just that actually what he's doing is so mission driven and so purposeful and so important. And again, one of those moments of why don't we know about this already? Why isn't this happening? Why is it so hard?
I think, yeah. And that, what you were saying, why is it so hard? That's the bit that's really stayed with me. And also this sense of nervousness.
Yeah.
Like I'm nervous at putting that podcast out there to see what the reaction is, because we live in such a world where, it's like we push men down to push others up. And actually, maybe it's about pushing everybody up together. And maybe that's not eloquent. And saying that, I'm like, am I going to be, am I going to be cancelled for saying that? I don't know. And that's the problem, I think. That's the problem, that this conversation about men and men's mental health and all of that carries so much weight with it. I don't know.
But I think I'd be asking anybody who's just listened to that to do so with a really curious, open mind. Each of us has our own struggles, irrelevant to whether we're female, male, whatever we identify with. And we all have to find ways to help each other, and the ways that will help one set of people will not help the other. And someday we might be in a position where we are either ourselves struggling and searching for that thing that could help, or we have a loved one who's struggling. And again, we're searching desperately for somebody who can offer them something that resonates with them. And that's, for me, well, I just hope anybody who has listened to that and for a moment thinks, why are we talking about men? Because we spend so much time talking about women, we have to make it fair, and we have to talk about everybody and bring everybody to the table.
And if you take this back, right, to human factors, and, it's all about increasing human performance. That's really what our entire aim is. And so we can't ignore 50% of the population and what is needed to promote maximum performance in them. I think it's a really powerful, and it really resonated for me as a wife as well. And his story was all too familiar. And you kind of I found it really difficult in that, to kind of have that mirror held up at times, for sure. But yeah, just the most phenomenal conversation. I loved it.
Yeah, me too. And I think the advice he was giving about the 4 big things, the idea that sleep, food, movement, connection, they're basic human needs for everybody, right? Irrespective of everybody. So, but reiterating them, reminding ourselves and doing those things and being attentive to those needs is so, so important. And starting the conversation about how we best service those needs for different people in our communities is so, so important.
I think I walk away from that just wondering whether, and this is a question I probably should have asked Dan, and I guess I kind of did, but didn't go down this track of, are we applying more pressure on men? Are women applying more pressure, a different pressure? And by that, I mean, well, what do I mean? I just wonder whether we are applying a different type of pressure, which is that they already carry the burden, whether correctly or incorrectly, for, feeling that they have to be, strong, silent, successful. And now we are so incredibly vocal about our needs and desires and wishes in our empowerment, that adding more pressure to men to be more successful or to be more aware, or I don't know. I don't feel like I'm being eloquent because I feel like it's a really difficult subject to talk about.
I'm curious.
I guess ultimately it's just left me with a huge number of questions that are percolating.
I don't know. I view it from a very different perspective as you, and I don't know that I feel it as such a difficult conversation as you. I would hope that what we're doing is not giving more pressure, but perhaps giving permission, and permission to have the conversation of just what works for you, and bringing that that openness and curiosity to the question rather than judgment of, we've all just sound a bit hippie, but we've got to be kind to each other. We've got to be compassionate and seek those different perspectives. And ultimately, it's not about, I don't know. I was kind of thinking about the fact that women have spent so long trying to get to where men have got, and then there's this, what? Why are we doing this? I just sat there and thought, oh my God, we've it's hard, right? It's hard. And that's stereotypical masculinity. But I don't know if this kind of, when we talk to other podcast guests, we've talked about that balance of masculinity and femininity, even if you're a female, right? What you're bringing to the boardroom or what you're bringing to whichever situation or workplace you're in, and understanding the limitations and capabilities that brings with it. and again, they're back to human factors of understanding those things and helping people talk about what works for them and finding the solutions. But yeah, ultimately, I thought Dan was amazing. Small part of me wants to be a man so I can join his walking group, to be honest.
Me too.
Although,
Me too.
well,
I love
how
walking up
quickly did we
mountains.
have to run 10K in?
Yes, you had to run 10K in 70 minutes. I think I'm just there, or I was just there, but that took quite a lot of training.
Yes, I think some work to do there. It's okay. I wouldn't, even if it was open to me, I don't think I'd be able to do it. So
Also, I can fairly confidently, when Dan was talking about, strong, silent and successful, I was like, me walking up a mountain is not silent, because I'll be yibber-yabbering on, and I suspect that is not what the space needs. But I just feel that has left me with so many thoughts, and we're recording this directly after the interview with Dan, and I really want to go away and stop and think and reflect and let it percolate and let it land, because it's kind of really given me a lot of things to consider and work through and think about, whilst forwarding the link to Men and Mountains to every man I know. Watch out, men.
I know.
Chasing them up the mountain.
Yes.
No, really, really good. And for anybody who didn't catch it, his book is called Rethinking Masculinity. And go to his website, which is better-men.uk, and order it from there, because honestly, the book is really easy to read, but just really insightful. Whether you are male or female, it is incredibly insightful. So I would really recommend people go to that. So yes, another phenomenal.
And I have to say, I think one of the only guests, I think there's a very select few, have almost made me cry on the podcast. So if that was an award.
And we recorded it virtually. So we have video footage of Helen trying to hold it back. I did think I saw the bottom lip going, and I was like, oh no. It was just so powerful what he was saying, and really resonated. And I just, oh God, I'm feeling it again. All right, move on. That's the end of the podcast. No. It's a safe space. Brilliant. Well, a joy as always. And until next time, keep listening, everybody.